Thank you so much, Terence, for that warm introduction. Thank you, Dr. John Endres, for the kind invitation to present this a memorial lecture. I'm deeply honored. Thank you, Taylor Dalton, for your professionalism and efficiency in organizing this event and allowing me to escape the Platteland to the big city. I should maybe confess that I was in contact with John, asking him about the dress attire for this evening, because, smart casual in Bloemfontein means fellies, and business attire, he is adding a two-tone shirt. So I hope I got it right. Established in 1929, the Institute for Race Relations has been at the forefront of intellectual debates and policy initiatives to promote classical liberalism. It is this vision of classical liberalism that I too share. At this particular crisis-prone state South Africa finds itself in, we need the thoughtful intervention of the Institute more than ever. It is for this reason that I have partnered with the Institute of Race Relations, I think over several years, in terms of joint initiatives through the good offices of Terence Corrigan. This lecture series is in honor of Reinhold Friedrich Albert Hoernlé and Agnes Winifred Hoernlé. Whilst the former was a renowned philosopher and a bastion of liberal thought beside the president of the Institute, the latter was regarded as the mother of social anthropology in South Africa. In honor of Alfred Hoernlé, my talk will be grounded in political philosophy, with particular emphasis on classical liberalism and the challenges we confront. Agnes Hoernlé was celebrated not only for her intellectual contributions, but also her social activism against apartheid policies. Given the enormity of the crisis confronting South Africa, I think we all need to be activists. The current configuration of the South African government will not rescue us. Indeed, Pretoria, through its atrocious policies and corrupt leadership, threatens each and every South African. We all need to ensure that this government reforms or is replaced if we are to embrace a liberal future and provide for our children a more peaceful and prosperous tomorrow. So, growing up as a non-white South African in the 1970s and 1980s, the ideological choices on offer to me was brutally stark and unappealing. There was the apartheid ideology espoused by the National Party, dressed up with a thin religious veneer of Christian nationalism, the tribalism of the various homeland leaders, as well as the manifestations of Black consciousness and Pan-Africanism. These were merely perpetuating the same us versus them dichotomy inherent to apartheid. Initially, I was drawn to the African National Congress, then in exile, and specifically the ideals of the Freedom Charter, which was adopted by the Congress of the People in 1955. However, I grew quickly disillusioned with it. For instance, the phrase "we the people," which appears throughout the document, was not really unpacked. It kind of reminded me of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's general will. For Rousseau, citizens had to move from self-love and self-interest to the collective and needed to devote themselves entirely to their state's needs. While stressing that people are sovereign, the notion of a general will subordinates the individual to the collective represented by an all-powerful state. It sets the basis for an autocratic state. Rousseau's ideas were published in the Social Contract in 1762 and inspired the French Revolution of 1789. No small wonder that the overthrow of King Louis XVI did not bring about emancipation, but led to Robespierre and the guillotine. Lest we forget, many communist states refer to themselves as people's republics. Some still do, like North Korea. These, of course, gave their people nothing but repression and the gulag. For this reason, I've always felt uncomfortable with the ANC still referring to themselves as a national liberation movement. In 2025, one might well ask, liberation from what? ANC looting and misgovernance. In 2011, I published a book entitled Against All Odds Opposition Political Parties in Southern Africa. Whilst my focus was on the political opposition, I could not do this without also considering incumbent ruling parties. What the erstwhile liberation movement and our ruling parties all had in common was this view of themselves as revolutionary parties, representing the will of the people. Conversely, the political opposition was portrayed as counter-revolutionary, unrepresentative of the people, which only the ruling party could represent. Worse, opposition parties in Southern Africa were viewed as representing some malign foreign interests. We see the same dynamic in South Africa, with members of the ruling party and senior civil servants portraying the DA or AfriForum as representing the interests of an imperial power or combination of imperial powers. Needless to say, this makes for a severely adversarial relationship between the ruling parties and opposition parties, and even civil society in Southern Africa. In contrast to Rousseau, there is the liberal tradition. It champions a political system which privileges individual rights, creating a private space distinct from the public realm, recognizing individual rights to property, respecting religious freedom, maintaining a healthy skepticism of government, and insisting on a system of checks and balances. Jeremy Bentham led the charge in 18th century England with his desire to rationalize the legal system and thereby making it accessible to ordinary citizens. It was Bentham who proposed limited government, the primary purpose of which was to ensure that individual citizens received the rewards for which they have toiled for. That was a revolutionary idea. It was John Stuart Mill who, following his meeting with Bentham in 1808, dedicated himself to the task of examining the specific relationship between the individual and the government. For Mill, the primary rationale for the existence of a government and its enduring purpose was to protect its citizens' property, allowing individuals to pursue their self-interest without encroaching on the rights of others. From that perspective, and despite the pretensions of the South African Constitution, we are not a liberal state. If we were, we would, for example, support the DA proposal on land reform, which entails redistributing 2 million hectares of state-owned land and 4,300 farms to its rural black citizens immediately. By granting title deeds to these, it would empower people in a real sense, allowing them to access finance and the like. While Mill argued that the government had to be imbued with sufficient power to accomplish its primary task, he was concerned that public officials might well pursue their own selfish interests whilst in office, to the detriment of citizens. To prevent this, Mill passionately argued for regular elections and an active citizenry to hold government to account. In his book Considerations on Representative Government, there was, however, a discernible tension between Mill's desire for public officials to be elected by citizens, the danger that this inherently holds, that anyone can be elected to office. People will be voted into public office who did not have the requisite skills to govern, between popularly elected officials and experts who had the requisite skill sets to govern the polity. In his 1859 book on liberty, John Stuart Mill went further in expressing his concerns about the limitations of representative government. He suggested that despotism was a legitimate form of government for societies which had not evolved the capacity for self-rule. These then must be governed by an autocratic state regulating their lives. However, once citizens had evolved to a level where their lot could be improved by free and equal discussion, the despotic regime was no longer needed and must be replaced by a more liberal government. It is precisely here where Mill intersects with Niccolo Machiavelli. Most famous for The Prince, published in 1513, which advocates for the abandonment of conventional morality and advises the ruler on the callous action needed to gain and maintain power. In Machiavelli's defense, however, he wrote his treatise during the rise of powerful nation-states like England, France, and Spain, which could wield bigger armies than Italy's fractured city-states. These city-states were at the mercy of brigands and mercenaries, and in 1494, French King Charles VIII invaded Machiavelli's own city-state of Florence. Machiavelli decried the weakness of Florence and Italy and sought a strong ruler who would restore order ruthlessly if necessary by creating a united Italian state. However, that's not the total Machiavelli. 4 years later, Machiavelli published the Discourses. Here he made clear that he was no advocate for tyranny for its own sake, writing that he preferred republics since they secured the liberty and interests of all. However, before one could transition from a more autocratic regime to a more democratic dispensation, there had to be order, and citizens needed to be educated in civic virtue. This position is not dissimilar from that of Mill. When people have the capacity to self-rule, a transition from authoritarianism to a more democratic dispensation may occur. In Machiavelli's thinking, the prince creates a secure and viable state and society, then he must step aside for citizens duly educated in civic virtue to exercise self-responsibility. With this background in mind, let us reflect on the South African pathway to a liberal democracy. While political commentators have much to say about the current merry-go-round of Parliament, whether the GNU will collapse, as well as the latest corruption scandal, I think there are far deeper questions which they give scant attention to. These three questions are the following. First, can South Africa be classified as a liberal democratic state? 2, what impact has state failure on the quest for a liberal democratic state? And 3, will liberal democracy follow the exit of the ANC from power? So let's take these three questions. The first one, can South Africa be classified as a liberal democratic state? Despite the pretensions of our constitution, South Africa has strayed from the classical liberal vision of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Bentham vehemently argued, as I mentioned earlier, in 18th century England, that the primary purpose of government was to ensure that individual citizens received the rewards for which they had toiled. John Stuart Mill, taking his cue from Bentham, would go on to argue that the enduring purpose of government was to protect its citizens' property. South Africa's Expropriation Act, as well as its draconian employment equity legislation, however, would suggest that socialism continues to have traction in the upper echelons of the ruling party. Moreover, the ANC continues to regard the opposition as acting at the behest of foreign actors. Recently, Nkabisi Jonas, MTN non-executive chair, and President Cyril Ramaphosa's special envoy to the US, in response to ongoing legal cases against MTN for violating the US Anti-Terrorism Act, lashed out and spoke of a deliberate campaign by local actors of dirty tricks to discredit South Africa and make it a pariah state. Nor does the ruling party countenance dissonance within its own ranks. Earlier this year, suspended Minister of Police Senzo Mchunu and former Minister of Finance Malusi Gigaba came under fire from the ANC for defying its protocols. Gigaba was quoted in the media stating that the ANC National Executive Committee had lost its way, while Mchunu publicly stated that the ANC was on the brink of collapse. Far from engaging with the substance of the statements, the ANC decided to shut down any critical voices within the party, declaring that all structures and members of the party must, I quote, speak with one voice guided by democratic centralism, unquote. This is censorship. The ANC's dismissive and or hostile attitude towards other political parties competing views within its own ranks suggests that this is a party not comfortable with liberal values like freedom of speech or tolerance. It also answers the question of why the ANC cannot engage in critical introspection and change its direction. There's another aspect. In 1966, Barrington Moore published his classic Social Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy, where he eloquently argued that a vibrant and strong middle class was essential for democracy to take root and flourish. Perhaps more to the point, this middle class must be autonomous. It must be autonomous, more argued, from the state. If one considers the demographic profile of South Africa, it is crucial that we look at how autonomous the black middle class is from the state. Sadly, it is not, but is instead dependent on clientelist government policy for its well-being. If one considers the middle class as a whole in South Africa, it is clear that it is contracting in purely economic terms as a result of the ANC's ineffective and predatory economic policies. Whilst incomes have been decreasing in real terms, living costs have sharply escalated. In Bentham's terms, the state is not allowing the citizens to receive the rewards that they have toiled to take. In one survey, 70% of middle-class respondents stated that they were financially stressed. Nor does the future trajectory look promising, with the state doubling down on its unrealistic promises of a universal basic income grant and national health insurance for all. While wonderful as an ideal, the state cannot afford it. Where is the money going to come from for these entitlements? Our overburdened and dwindling tax base cannot absorb additional taxes. This is a point which Edward Kiswetter, our SARS commissioner, has repeatedly had to make clear to our political class. The question remains, where is this money supposed to come from? While some have suggested taking on more debt to fund these grandiose ANC projects, it is worth reminding ourselves that South Africa's annual economic growth is less than 1%, and that our sovereign debt has ballooned from a modest 650 billion rand in 2009 to a staggering 5.5 trillion rand at the end of 2024. Equally unsustainable, the government is more focused on the provision of social grants than growing the economy and creating jobs and restoring dignity for its citizens. Currently, 7.9 million taxpayers support 28 million social grant recipients. The future for the country's struggling middle class looks bleak, as do the prospects for a liberal democracy. So let me turn to my second question. What impact has state failure had on the quest for a liberal democratic state? In my view, there can be no talk of a liberal democracy without a capable state. It is precisely for this reason that Francis Fukuyama's majestic The Origins of Political Order, which traces the historic development of the state from ancient to modern times, places the level of stateness, or a state with capabilities, at the center of order, stability, economic growth, peace, and sustainable development. State capacity in South Africa, however, has been steadily eroding. The state proved itself unable to quell the July 2021 riots, mitigate crime, keep the lights on, stimulate the economy, or fix a pothole. The Fragile State Index monitors various factors which contribute to state fragility in 179 countries. These factors include the security apparatus, factionalized elites, group grievances, economic decline, uneven economic development, human flight, brain drain, state legitimacy, human rights, and the rule of law. By 2024, South Africa's fragility was scored at 69.6, up from 57.4 in 2007. The country rose from 132nd to 80th place over the same period, where higher rankings signify greater fragility. That places it in the company of countries like Belarus. So according to this index, this is the warning category. It is no coincidence that so many analysts have warned about the prospects of a civil war, or at the very least, South Africa's very own Arab Spring. Buttressing the state must be a vibrant nation. The concept of nation, however, is under threat, especially in its rainbow nation form, which was so enthusiastically espoused in April 1994 and following. What the May 2024 election heightened was an increase in tribal politics. Think here of the Zulu support base of Nkutu where the colored support base of the Patriotic Alliance. This is very dangerous for other reasons too, since secessionist tendencies have emerged in both KZN and the Western Cape. It is often forgotten that a unitary South Africa is a relatively recent phenomenon, having only been established in 1910. As such, fragmentation of the nation and society constitutes a real threat. Order is absent in the country. This is evident in the 26,632 murders recorded in 2024 in South Africa, which translates to 72 murders a day. It makes us the second worst murder capital in the world after Jamaica. There's no order when the construction mafia costs this country 63 billion rand in stalled or cancelled projects in 2022 and 49 billion rand in lost revenue in 2023. There's no order when Intercape buses are attacked by taxi bosses in the Eastern Cape, or e-hailing drivers are assaulted by taxi drivers in Gauteng. It negates Mill's view of the state protecting private property and allowing the conditions for citizens to pursue their own self-interest without encroaching on the freedom of others. In this state of disrespect for the law, business, confidence, and profits are evaporating, and so are the taxes to the state. In the process, state capacity is eroded because those taxes pay for the capacity within the state to govern for the well-being of all South Africans. Let me turn to the third question. Is liberal democracy going to follow the exit of the ANC from power? In my view, it is naive to believe that liberalism in South Africa will flourish once we see the back of the ANC. There are two reasons for this: the choices on offer from political parties and the resistance which a new government will confront. The DA, in my view, has made a number of strategic errors. For instance, was it wise for John Stuart Mill, the leader of the Liberal DA, to personally join the cabinet, or would it have been better for him to stay outside and redirect his energy at building the party in the run-up to the local government elections next year and the general election thereafter? In my view, this was a strategic error. Similarly, was it wise for Helen Zille, chair of the DA Federal Council, to state that the DA would protect Ramaphosa from the threat of impeachment over the Phala allegations? There are few in South Africa who find the president's version of events at Phala credible. The Liberal DA, which is supposed to believe that all are equal before the law, was quite willing to sacrifice principles to be in the cabinet, however. This is an issue not lost on some of its disillusioned supporters. Then there's the ever-present issue of race. Roman Kabinet, Steyn Hayset, erstwhile Chief of Staff, did the DA no favors with his alleged racist remarks, nor for that matter was choice of Ronaldo Kroos as a DA member of Parliament helpful after old videos emerged of him using racially charged language to make a political point. While the DA did take decisive action in the case of Kroos by suspending him, it does beg the question, especially for Black South Africans, as to why such individuals won't feel comfortable to join the DA. The DA's image as a dominant white party amongst Black South Africans was reinforced. Neither did it help the Liberal cause to be associated with a white party. Of course, the DA did try at least to have a black leader in the form of Musi Memane and other ill-fated attempts to have a black face. These efforts, however, have failed since they were not perceived to be authentic black leaders. Possibly for this reason, the Oppenheimers funded political parties with black leaders who espoused ostensibly liberal values, like Rise and Zanzi, who received 15 million rand, and Action South Africa, which received 10 million rand in the run-up to the 2024 national elections. The return on investment was poor, judging by the national election results. In my view, the South African business community that donated to parties like Rise and Zanzi and Action SA was motivated by desperation and did not critically engage with these gentlemen, who they really are, their personalities, their commitment to liberal democracy, and so forth. Other businessmen generously donated to the Patriotic Alliance. Once again, no serious due diligence was performed on the character and capacity of the leader, other than his support for Israel, it seems to me. There is now speculation that Patrice Motsepe will succeed Cyril Ramaphosa to lead the ANC. The good ANC, we are told, will rally around Motsepe, and they will form a strong alliance with the DA and herald some new nirvana. What every South African should know by now is that there was no new dawn, and that there is no good ANC. If South Africa is to have a fighting chance, we need to see the backs of the ANC in totality. You would recall that the business community rallied around the good Cyril Ramaphosa against the bad Jacob Zuma. One does not build a black middle class overnight through quick fix solutions. This has to develop organically and cannot happen without growing the economy. There's a second reason to doubt that a liberal polity will miraculously develop following the ouster of the ANC. This entails the inevitable resistance which any new government will experience from vested interests, whether inept civil servants in bloated government departments or those accruing wealth from various corrupt tenders. With the cost of corruption in the trillions, the stakes are high. The killing of whistleblowers like Babita Deokaran suggests that those benefiting from corruption and the like will go to extreme lengths to protect their ill-gotten gains. So what is to be done? The path to a liberal South Africa. Our politics is broken, and citizens have lost faith that political parties will deliver the promised better life for all. One indication of this is the millions of South Africans who do not vote. More than 11 million registered voters chose not to exercise their vote in 2024. Millions more chose not to even register to vote. South Africans have lost faith in the ballot box to deliver change. Another indicator is that support for military rule in South Africa, according to Afrobarometer, has almost doubled from 28% in 2022 to 49% in 2025. This reflects growing popular disenchantment with the existing political system, which has scarcely had a positive material impact on ordinary citizens' lives. And this is where I'm going to be a bit controversial. It is precisely here where we need Machiavelli's prince, not a classical African strongman, but someone with the highest integrity and the required measure of toughness and competence to stare down the corrupt and do what is necessary to restore order and build capacity in the state. This kind of thinking was recently aired by Rob Hersov in his discussion with This News when he referred to a benevolent despot. Here we need to be honest. Our security forces are politicized and criminalized. A July 24 northern Mozambique from Islamist insurgents or secure eastern DRC from M23 rebels, our security forces have proven to be woefully inadequate. Yet, order can be restored if the private sector works with a radically overhauled state security apparatus. I penned an article 2 years ago discussing the mechanics of how this collaboration would work. This benevolent despot would need to be surrounded by a group of technocrats. We have a number of bright people in the business sector who could play the role of these technocrats, building capacity in the state or stateness in Fukuyama's terms. This technocratic, and I would add meritocratic society, has long historic roots. From Plato's philosopher king to Francis Bacon, Henry Saint-Simon, Auguste Comte, and Thorstein Veblen and the American technocratic movement in the 20th century. Once again, a number of detailed proposals have been discussed in depth by scholars and members of this movement as to the practicalities of the concept. I realize that what I'm proposing is radical, but I see this lecture as an initial starting point and an invitation for further discussion and critique. Frankly, given our moribund politics, our crumbling economy, I see this as an attempt to find a workable alternative to the current crisis confronting us. While the establishment of law and order would be the first priority for this new government to focus on, the economy must be prioritized. Shedding the various odious constraints on business is the quickest way to ensure that more people participate in the economy. Given the prevailing demographics in the country, it would result in more participation in the formal economy of Black South Africans and especially the youth. There are a number of excellent proposals emanating from John Endres and the Institute of Race Relations to kickstart the economy, and here I would single out the Institute's blueprints for growth, which I endorse. And Bernstein Center for Development and Enterprise has also done some excellent work here. Order and economic growth would result in a vibrant and independent middle class in Barrington Moore's terms. Citizens would be schooled not only on their rights, but their responsibilities, as Machiavelli extolled. And civil servants chosen on the basis of their in terms of their competence and their commitment to South Africa, as opposed to their political connections. Following this transition period, a more liberal order can again be restored. So, conclusion, since 1948, South Africa has been effectively governed by two political parties, the National Party and the ANC. Both were highly centralized, which believed that they represented all of South Africa. The NP and its malevolent ideology of apartheid brought the country to ruin. The ANC's reign has been equally ruinous, with its endemic corruption and gross incompetence. In contrast to this stands the liberal tradition. While many liberals assume that the 24 election, which heralded the GNU, would mean the demise of this dominant party hegemony, the reality is that it's not going that smooth. Inept civil servants will resist any effort to dislodge them from their lucrative post. The corrupt will fight any attempt at clean governance. Therefore, for a liberal polity to take root, order has to be established. The path to John Stuart Mill's liberal utopia may well mean embracing Niccolo Machiavelli's prince. So, with that, I say thank you.